I'm Walter Schirra, and this is the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. The Smithsonian keeps its eye on the unfolding of scientific mysteries throughout the world. One such unsolved case is fast becoming one of the great scientific detection stories of all time. To get the story, I went to Turkey, to the ancient city of Knidos, and talked with a detective on the case. Her name is Cornelia Love, and she is a special kind of investigator, an archaeologist, a scientist who seeks in the buried history of modern man the evidence of the small steps and the giant steps that have brought us to the present. Miss Love is looking for a marble statue, the most famous of ancient times, a woman called Aphrodite, goddess of fertility and sensual love, the first nude statue of a woman in Greek art, carved in Athens around 350 BC by a man named Praxiteles, missing for 1,500 years. Iris Love believes she knows where the statue can be found. She has these clues to work with: a marble finger, the section of a hand, 2 pieces of drapery carved in marble, and minted in Knidos when the goddess was there, coins bearing her portrait. In the next hour, we will try to unravel this mystery and see how Iris Cornelia Love, archaeological detective, peels back layer after layer of time in the case of the missing statue in the search for the goddess of love.
CBS News presents A Smithsonian Adventure, Search for the Goddess of Love. The reporter, Walter Schirra.
The story begins, and it might end, here, in a hillside tomb at a place called the Shrine of Demeter. There is passion and suspense, and hidden somewhere a missing woman, rich and famous, and last seen in a city of the Near East. It involves a search that may never end. As in any good detective story, certain facts are known. Name, Aphrodite, goddess of sensual love. Also known as Aphrodite Euploia, protectress of sailors. Height 6'3", complexion Parian marble. Born Athens, about 350 BC. Created by Praxiteles, artist, man about town. Model, a woman named Phryne, mistress of Praxiteles. Residence, for 800 years, Knidos, a city that was offered settlement of a huge public debt in exchange for the statue, but refused a king's ransom for it. The most copied statue of ancient times. 52 copies remain. You see some of them now. Stories say the model, Phryne, accused of disrespect for the gods, revealed her bosom to her judges and was acquitted. All that is left of her is a memory carved in marble, and the determination of another woman to solve the mystery of the statue's disappearance. We pick up the trail of the missing goddess first in Athens. That's where Phryne and Praxiteles lived in 350 BC. We have seen these postcard views of that great city, all that cold marble in the hot Greek sun. But did you know that these buildings were once decorated with bright colors, that a statue's face might be gilded, its eyes might be painted? The Greeks were above all commercial. Their gross national product was olive oil, wine, the pottery these were shipped in, the great fleets that carried them, and the colonists who built 1,500 other cities like this. They had a technology based on the simple lever, the screw, the wheel, and the pulley that would not be surpassed for another 1,000 years. In a house like one of these, perhaps with a small red lantern at the door, Phryne received her lover, the successful artist. He honored her by creating Aphrodite in her image. Praxiteles made 2 statues of Aphrodite, one clothed, the other nude, the first Greek female nude. He offered them both for sale. Around the Aegean, newly rich Greek cities were busy beautifying themselves and the shrines at which they worshipped. The island city of Kos apparently was prudish and preferred its love goddesses decently dressed. Knidos, on the Asia Minor coast, was more daring. It bought the nude and, as it turned out, got the better bargain. Aphrodite, shown in this Vatican copy, was a Praxiteles masterpiece, and he was a master at revealing the sheer sensual grace of the human body. Aphrodite was not simply a naughty story to the Greeks. She was fertility and human desire, powers they had seen populate the world and create happiness and strife, powers certainly worthy of fear and worship. This Aphrodite, preparing for the bath that symbolized purification and regeneration, was also Greece at its zenith, idealized yet full of common sense reality. For more than 800 years, this Aphrodite was the glory of Knidos, the magnet for visitors from all over the ancient world. Then in the 5th century AD, she disappeared without a trace. 2 centuries later, Knidos itself became just a jumble of moon rock on the lonely coast of western Turkey. Knidos was like a space station on the far edge of the Greek universe. Her acropolis overlooked twin harbors. In her best days, 100,000 people lived here. The harbors were filled with ships from Egypt, Syria, from Palestine and Italy. With good reason, Aphrodite of Knidos was called Euploia, protectress of sailors. Here longshoremen grunted as they loaded the wine for which Knidos was famous as far away as France. Some old mooring stones remain. Incoming ships may have carried glassware and ivory from Alexandrian Egypt, copper from Cyprus, textiles from Syria. They brought marble from Greece, conquerors from Rome, and tourists from all over. From the theater, seating 5,000, on cushions rendered as if they were in a ballpark, the audience could see small naval spectacles or hear the works of the Athenian playwrights, earthy comedies, or blood and thunder melodramas of men crying out against their fate, the actors' voices rousing the audience to pity and to terror. Greek science began in cities like Knidos. There was a great medical school here. A Greek from Asia Minor dared suggest the Earth moved around the sun and began a train of thought that culminated in our own landing on the moon. Knidos had her own great astronomer, Eudoxus. This sundial is a sign of Cnidian sophistication. It marked the equinox and the solstice, as well as the simple hours of the day. But Knidos could only measure time, not defeat it. The Romans conquered and ruled. Then they themselves were ruled by Christianity. When the Roman Empire split, the Byzantine power ruled Knidos. Pagan deities were swept away, including Aphrodite. Marble statues were burned to make lime for mortar. The temples of Apollo and Zeus became building material for the churches of Christ. Then, born by the fires of another new religion, the Muslim Arabs came. By 700 AD, at least 2,000 years old, Knidos was abandoned. The Arabs left a priceless gift, frozen as if by a lens, a city waiting to be dug up. In the early 19th century, the English Society of Dilettanti and later the French explored the site. In 1857, Sir Charles Newton made great discoveries. Then, for 110 years, silence. No one can prove that these geese are descendants of those sacred Aphrodite, but they have that local reputation. Iris Cornelia Love is 37. She's a graduate of Smith College. As a senior, she used some archaeological detective work to prove that 2 famous statues in a noted museum were fakes. The museum removed the statues, with no thanks to Iris. Long Island University is the academic sponsor of our expedition, but it is paid for by foundation and individual grants. Its young members are recruited from Britain, the United States, and especially Turkey, which is very keen on preserving its ancient heritage. Not everyone here is an archaeologist. Some are architects, photographers, linguists, students of the classics, all of whom play a part in the detective work of archaeology. Some are just along for the excitement of being in on something big. Sheila Gibson and Mary Keith are Iris Love's principal aides. There's nothing fancy about the food. As a matter of fact, if you've seen it once, you'll probably see it again tomorrow. Funds must go less for food than into the dig itself, especially into tools and wages for the Turkish workmen. An archaeological dig is something like taking a sample core of the moon, but more complicated. Cities just don't sink into the ground. They are buried. New cities are built on top of their own ruins. The earth below is a city's memory. A bulldozer here would destroy the evidence you are looking for. So you probe with a trench, taking a cross-section of a small area, carefully peeling back layer after layer of stone, of art, and of priceless household junk. This is the huge rubbish heap from which Iris Love hopes to pluck the missing goddess. To find Aphrodite, Iris Love has to excavate a city. She is a construction boss, in addition to art and history expert. The hope of finding the missing statue intact is small. The hope of even finding what caused her disappearance 1,500 years ago depends upon what comes out of the trenches, piece by piece. What do the streets reveal? And how can you reconstruct the lives of 1 million human beings who lived here during all the centuries that the city existed? It requires the most painstaking detective work. During a lull in her work, I talked with Iris Love.
What I've seen here in Knidos is a beautiful city. You can see that even by superficial looking, a magnificent city. But how does this city function in your mind as you reclaim it, as you recapture the past?
We know that she was already a powerful city in the 7th and 6th centuries BC. We know this because she sent colonies off to the Lipari Islands, to Sicily, and Corfu, and as such must have had a thriving population.
Yeah.
She also was able to donate a beautiful treasury to the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi. Also, she must have been extremely wealthy in the 4th century BC, because from literary sources, we know that her sanctuaries were decorated by works of art by the most famous sculptors in antiquity, Bryaxis, Scopas, and Leocares. But all of these works were eclipsed by the most famous statue in antiquity, the Aphrodite of Praxiteles.
This is earthquake country. A system of dowels and clamps made Greek buildings flexible to withstand shocks.
Yes.
This isn't a clamp.
What's that?
This is a dowel.
Oh, for placing a
You see,
structure above it.
where's, this is something, yes, we put the bronze pin in.
Right.
You have a little lead channel. Here is the lead channel. The hot lead is poured through the channel. The bronze pin is put
there.
here. And then the next block is placed on top of that.
The dowels held vertically, the clamps held laterally. These are the clamps. A possibility that must be considered, Aphrodite may have been an earthquake victim. No mortar was used in construction. These mason marks indicate that the blocks were probably prefabricated to close tolerances in the stone yard, then matched, mark for mark, on the building site. Foundations tend to last, but the buildings above them tend to fall, and the pieces wander. They go into a garden wall, the lintel of a peasant's house. It is hoped that the pieces will be found on their original site, so that the relationships can be plotted, and the architect's projection of the fallen building made. This is the game, the mystifying, difficult game that must be played if the missing goddess is to be found. When Iris Love came to Canidos in 1967, she had Sir Charles Newton's map. Newton's important finds a century before included a Corinthian temple, a gymnasium, a large theater, and most important, the shrine of the goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone on the east side of the city. Among Miss Love's important excavations are the small theater we have seen, a 6th century Byzantine church, a city council meeting place, a temple of Apollo, and a major street intersection on the western side of the city. Digging out these columns led to the discovery of the intersection where one of the city's principal avenues terminates at a steep north-south street. The avenue runs east-west and may have been lined with temples, small shrines, public buildings, and small shops shaded from the sun. It may also have been a religious center as well as a popular meeting place when Canidos bustled with prosperity. Crossing under the avenue, there's a big drain which looks Hellenistic.
It was perhaps a storm drain, given the magnitude of it and the enormity of it. It looked sort of like the great drains, the sewers of Paris. A water conduit leading the drain waters into the sea. It is extremely well constructed.
The intersection produces several fragments of sculpture. Among them is a portrait head that Iris calls a gentleman of rather severe expression. It's probably a Roman emperor of around 100 AD.
From the hairstyle, it would appear that the head was Flavian or possibly Trajanic, and it might even be a portrait of the great Emperor Trajan himself. There are a great many portraits of Trajan because the Roman Empire reached its greatest extent under his rule, but this may be more what the emperor actually looked like.
In another part of the city, the expedition is excavating a north-south stepped street, a street with stone stairs and landings. Urban Greeks almost everywhere built their houses on the sides of hills and mountains, rising in terraces. Private houses tell an archaeologist more about an age than temples or public buildings. This is where the people who worshipped Aphrodite must have lived. The townspeople, wine merchants, sea captains, ship's chandlers, foundry owners, who refused to sell the goddess to pay the national debt. In Canidos, a prosperous city with running water, hot baths, these stepped houses were probably built in accord with a carefully drawn city plan.
What I visualize the city as being with these monumental terraces, sort of stepped houses, perhaps 2 stories, maybe even 3, but not the apartment houses that one finds in Rome or Ostia or Pompeii.
I see.
Just 2-storied houses like one finds in modern Greek or Turkish villages.
Where the second story sees out over the second story of the house in front of it. So the first story is buried, in essence.
Yes,
Yeah.
and in fact, from our excavation at Step Street 3, it would appear that the second story was the one that was decorated with the painted stucco and the architectural imitations.
Out of these houses comes the evidence of lives lived richly, while Europe was still a barbaric wilderness. In the plaster decorations, there are stories of the gods, of Troy, of Greek heroes. And they look down on children, men busy with business, women dreaming. All the pieces can do, however, is suggest. They can't quite tell us what it was all about. Steady probing by Miss Love, east-west, north-south, has produced intersection after intersection in the typical grid pattern of a Hellenistic Greek city. The grid spreads through the city from wall to wall. This means that at the height of the city's history, you could walk from one side of town to the other on a paved street. This may be important evidence later, in the case of the missing goddess. A great archaeologist did not say that his science is telling it like it was, but that's what it is, telling it like it was as precisely as possible. The nuts and bolts of archaeology are closely related to the nuts and bolts of detective work. The archaeologist brushes and measures as carefully as a fingerprint expert. The artist's conception of things and faces not yet identified has its place here too. What a detective would call mugshots are taken by the thousands. The relationship of every piece of the puzzle must be deduced over a span of centuries. In the case of Aphrodite, it's like asking the ruins of the city, where were you on the night of January the 13th, 350 years before and after the birth of Christ?
So I think that
Even experts in ancient Greek writing have a role.
and that's another alpha.
Yeah, okay.
But the only trouble is, what word ends in alpha, epsilon, and alpha?
And that's where you need the reverse dictionary.
Yes.
This is a treaty written in 85 BC between the Romans and Mithridates of Pontus, who tried to keep Greek Asia Minor out of Roman hands. In 66 BC, the Romans finally drove him out, and Cnidos settled peacefully into the empire.
Good. Dogma, beginning of.
It is stratification that is the great and special technique of modern archaeology. This man is tagging each layer of debris deposited by each flood of time. If you can date one layer of objects, you have a good chance of dating those above and below. You might say, this is the remains of one empire, below it is the trash of another. We're in a cave behind a temple, and here is the bread and butter of archaeological detective work, pottery. This cave was probably a shrine where vessels containing offerings of wine to a god were broken and left. When pottery shards are found, the dating, by the design, by the kind of firing, the glaze, the quality of the finish, will provide a precise history of the place in which they were found. They will suggest what kind of people owned them, how long they believed in one god before switching to another, and link this place with trends and fashions throughout the world in which they lived.
Not right, does it? I said a CI.
Pottery, because it is of the earth itself, is the most lasting of any of man's material creations, and even broken, gives its precise testimony to scholars. By strict government regulation, nothing may leave Turkey. These objects found by Iris Love are now in Turkish museums: pitchers, wine bottles, common household utensils, oil lamps. The head of a lion, animal of funerals and guardian of the dead. The head of Medusa with her coiffure of snakes. On the marble lips of this head, a flake of red paint, surviving after 2,000 years. And most important of all, a clue to Aphrodite, a finger. Parian marble and about the right size, and found in the right place. On July 20th, 1969, the same day Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were walking on the moon, Iris Love discovered, almost due west of the Shrine of Demeter, on the other side of the city, a round temple. And it was in a round temple, ancient witnesses reported, they last saw Aphrodite, the missing goddess. In the early 2nd century AD, the Roman writer, Pliny the Younger, reported that Aphrodite's temple was surrounded by perfumed gardens in a place that was always cool. Even though this region is almost a desert today and Cnidos has 106-degree summer days, it is true there is always a sea breeze here. Pliny told how Aphrodite stood high above the city where all incoming ships could see her temple. Travelers had also written that the statue could be seen from all sides, suggesting that her temple was both round and open. But this is not conclusive proof that it was. Corroborative evidence was necessary. There were few such temples in the Greek world, but one known to be a copy does still exist in Italy. Hadrian's villa in Tivoli, 18 miles east of Rome, was built by the Emperor Hadrian, who ruled early in the 2nd century after Christ. This was his imperial palace. Some called it his private World's Fair. Hadrian was a great tourist, and he collected buildings he liked the way we might collect snapshots. One of the most striking buildings is this circular temple. For years it was thought to be a shrine of the water nymphs, a copy of some building that Hadrian had seen on his travels, but no one knew where. Then in 1958, Italian archaeologists, excavating at the base of this temple, found a copy of the statue of Aphrodite. This is a copy of that copy. The question artists Love now had to ask was this: if Hadrian's round temple is the copy, and the round temple I have found at Cnidos is the original, how do I prove it? In the summer of 1970, she sent architect Sheila Gibson to Tivoli to make drawings, and above all, measurements. It would have to be like matching a suspect's shoe to a footprint found at the scene of the crime. Hadrian's round temple measured 17 meters, 25 centimeters in diameter. The diameter of the round temple at Cnidos was exactly 17 meters, 30 centimeters. Just 2 inches difference. It was a remarkable fit. Miss Love had also found, near the center of the round temple, a base with a recess that would precisely fit the feet of a 6'3" statue of a woman. If this is where she stood, high above her city, looking at her ships for 800 years, with Praxiteles and Phryne, philosophers, Caesars, empires, one by one, all dead and turned to dust, where is she now? What happened?
Originally, the temple was probably open with a simple colonnade running around the stylobate blocks. And then I would say the temple lasted in this form at least through the reign of Hadrian, because his copy is identical to this. And that sometime between Hadrian's copy and Pseudo-Lucian's description, which was in the early 4th century, something happened to the temple. There was some destruction, some catastrophe. The podium has cracked, whether this is through natural erosion or whether it was through an earthquake, by means of an earthquake, I don't know.
If an earthquake caused her disappearance, the missing goddess would still be here, in fragments perhaps, but here, right here. The summer is short. Funds are short. Some rocks deposited by a slide sometime in the past are blocking the search for Aphrodite. To move them requires more time and equipment than Miss Love can afford. She's decided, therefore, to take a risk, to use dynamite, a relatively uncommon tool of archaeology. This must be done as gently, I guess, as changing the course of a spacecraft on its way to the moon. Brush is spread over the round temple to protect it from falling fragments.
I had nightmares every night. I had thoughts that part of the cliff that lies behind the Temple of Aphrodite might crumble, sending an avalanche down across the site itself, to say nothing of destroying the temple itself. I had nightmares about men being hurt, even more catastrophic things, perhaps even lives being lost. Fantastic.
The round temple has not been damaged. No one has been hurt.
It was sort of like Vesuvius. It just went up into the air and came down like rain.
Iris greets every new find with the exuberance of the very first one. And this is a good one.
Ah!
Look at this. It's a little older, babe. No, there must be another piece to this. But look at this beautiful little iris. Now, don't ever use a mala on marble because you'll scratch it. Never.
Shall I get a bigger brush?
Yes.
This small altar base very likely stood at the entrance of the round temple of Aphrodite to receive offerings of wine from visitors and worshippers. At this point, this is the evidence Miss Love has assembled. She has found 2 fragments of drapery carved in marble. Aphrodite was nude, but the drapery was a part of the sculpture. She has found the palm of her right hand, with dowel holes at the finger joints, a mark of the work of Praxiteles. She has this finger and another. All fragments are Parian marble, another mark of Praxiteles. And she has a statue base found in the round temple, a precise fit for the missing goddess. By this time, Miss Love has built quite a case, but once again she needs supporting evidence. Once again, Italy, this time the Vatican. 52 copies of the Aphrodite have been found. 4 of the best are here at the Vatican. I saw one of the most interesting, the Colonna Aphrodite. The match of Miss Love's fragments to the drapery on the water jar is not conclusive. No 2 marble blocks, quarried centuries apart, could possibly be the same size, and the copyist could have taken liberties. In the really important comparisons in the hand, the section Iris Love has found matches the Colonna in style and proportion. The fingers correspond almost exactly. She seems to be tantalizingly close, but there is still no way to prove her clues are truly the work of Praxiteles.
Prax, ite, Leos, it would fit, Praxiteles. A poison, made.
It is July 31st, 1970, the day before Iris Love's birthday, and she has just made the most marvelous find of her life, the cornerstone of the Temple of Aphrodite.
Praxiteles. Nude Aphrodite.
You're so excited.
This inscribed stone was probably placed in the foundation either when the temple was built, sometime before the birth of Christ, or when the temple was restored at some later date.
Well, if this were not beginning the sentence, if one just found a prax in the middle of a line, and then something destroyed before it, then one would have reason to doubt, because it could be et praxis and part of the verb. But the very fact that it's the beginning, prax, pi, rho, alpha, xi, Praxiteles, and presumably an epsilon, a poison, sigma, epsilon, nu. Praxiteles made this. And then this chi, which means and, alpha, gamma, epsilon, mu, which would stand for agymnos or agymnimeni. And the agymni or agymnimeni would mean nude, undressed. And the Aphrodite was the first nude female statue ever created. So it would be Praxiteles made the nude Aphrodite. The most exciting part of this inscription is that it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is the temple of the famous Aphrodite Eucloia. It's very, very exciting.
This is as exciting a day in an archaeologist's life as it would be for me to walk in space.
Now, with all this exhausting work and the initial thrill, the exhilaration of the discovery of the temple itself of Aphrodite, then the base stone and the finger, and the inscription with Praxiteles on the tablet, where are we really in the search for Aphrodite herself?
I myself will continue to look for her with every effort and energy I have. I simply cannot believe that the statue that was worshipped for over 800 years, that the city, all the inhabitants of Canidos refused to part with, even for a king's ransom, would have ended her life in a lime kiln, or that the inhabitants of the city would ever have permitted anybody to carry her off. And I think the fact that her finger is here, that her base is here, that even the inscription was here, might point to the hope that somewhere here, at least fragments of the rest of this great statue may be found, and perhaps even in other museums in the world. Who knows?
Even as we spoke in Canidos, Iris Love already had a very good idea of where to look next. London, and the British Museum is, to continue the metaphor, the next stakeout in the case of the missing goddess. Sir Charles Newton, whose bust you see, was Miss Love's early Victorian predecessor at Canidos. He brought with him great energy, plenty of funds, and the help of a squadron of the Royal Navy. He took away with him 350 crates of archaeological treasure, now deposited at the British Museum. For 2 years, he explored Canidos extensively, and as it is in all science and scholarship, it is partly on Newton's work that Iris Love has been able to build her own. Among the treasures Sir Charles took with him was this great lion. It is now on display at the British Museum. Also on display, found in the shrine of Demeter and her daughter Persephone, is the statue of Demeter herself, goddess of agriculture. Not on display is a collection of broken arms, legs, torsos, and heads also found in Demeter's shrine. They are in the basement. Among them is number 1314, female ideal head, perhaps Aphrodite. Miss Love was certain this head, with its shattered chin, was her missing goddess. She says the museum agreed to let her make her announcement first to the archaeological world. Then she learned that the head in the basement was going on display. She made her announcement in the New York Times, shocking some colleagues. The museum now says the head is not Aphrodite. Miss Love insists it is, and points to measurements made by her co-worker, Sheila Gibson.
The measurements that Sheila had taken, I then applied to 4 copies, 4 known and accepted copies that were in the Vatican Museum, and 4 copies known and accepted that were in the Louvre, including the famous Kaufmann head, so-called Kaufmann head, which was found at Trolleys in Asia Minor. The dimensions of 1314, as well as the dimensions of the heads that I have mentioned, fitted, almost to the millimeter.
A severe transatlantic storm broke out, and what follows is how 2 archaeological detectives can take a set of clues and come up with 2 different answers. CBS News correspondent Charles Collingwood spoke with Bernard Ashmole, former keeper of Greek and Roman antiquities at the British Museum.
Professor Ashmole, what were the reasons that led you and other scholars who have gone into the subject to come to the conclusion that the attribution of this as an Aphrodite head, particularly by Praxiteles, was not the correct one?
Well, we know what the Cnidian was like. First of all, from the coins, we know exactly how the hair was done, and it comes well back from the neck, leaving the nape of the neck here quite clear. And then we've got a number of replicas. Best known, perhaps, is in the Louvre. And from this, we know exactly how the hair was done. And there are traces on the British Museum head which makes it clear that the hair was not done in this way on the British Museum.
This is
a recognized replica of the Cnidian. It's the so-called Kaufmann head. If you look at the way the hair comes off the forehead here, comes down a bit, and then it goes off almost horizontally towards the back. Now, if you look at the British Museum head, you'll see that it starts off in the same way, but instead of going backwards horizontally, it continues on straight down, and you can pick up the absolutely certain trace of it here. And that is so different from the layout of the hair on the known replicas of the Cnidian. It seems to me that proves that this is not a replica.
If one looks at a photograph, a profile view of head 1314, which I prefer to call the head of Aphrodite, you will notice that the hair is pulled down over the ear, low onto the back of the neck, where it would have formed a bun low on the nape of the neck. The reason I'm emphasizing pull down and low on the nape of the neck is because on Cnidian coins, this is exactly the hairstyle that is represented. And this hairstyle is rare in the history of Greek sculpture. Much more common, in fact, the common hairstyle is the type of hairstyle which is exhibited on the Kaufmann head in the Louvre, with the bun pulled back like a chignon and rather high on the head. And some copies are even higher. But this one, as you can see from the coin, is low on the nape of the neck, and this is exactly what has been indicated by what remains on the fragment of 1314. Now, I need not press the point that the die cutters had the statue of the Cnidian Aphrodite before them to copy, and they would have copied an unusual hairstyle. This hairstyle only exists on about 2 or 3 other Greek statues and 1 other copy in the Vatican. However, this summer, during the process of excavation in the area east of Step Street 7 in the houses, 2 souvenir copies of the Aphrodite of Cnidos were excavated. Both of these souvenir copies indicate, I won't even say indicate, show that the bun, here is a latex mold, show that the hair is pulled over the ear, low, down onto the nape of the neck. The bun is placed low on the nape of the neck. There is a second one that is almost the identical representation of the Aphrodite on the coin. Now I ask you, these 4 monuments from Cnidos, 1314 found at Cnidos, this found at Cnidos, the third head and these coins, are they not more to be trusted, being Cnidian monuments? Their provenance undoubted found at Cnidos, the coin minted at Cnidos, designed at Cnidos. Are these not to be trusted more than the majority of Roman copies that are at times even copies of copies?
The other point is the actual poise of the head on the neck. If you look at the British Museum head straight on, the head is set off just a little from the neck. That's to say, the neck does move a little to her, shear off a little to her left in relation to the head. But if you look at the accepted replicas of the Cnidian, the neck shears off much more sharply. If you look at the head in profile, you'll see that it's, in the accepted replicas, it's thrust very much forward and the throat runs back towards her body. In the British Museum head, you'll see that it's almost at right angles with the chin would have come here. It's almost at right angles. And this, a fundamental difference of composition, seems to me to be an even stronger, though perhaps not quite such an obvious point, against it being a replica at all.
I think the head is mounted wrongly. The British Museum has mounted the head as a frontal head. And this is disputed by the position of the neck muscles. The muscles on the right of the neck are taut. And on the left side present sort of fatty rings, the so-called rings of Venus. This would indicate that the head was inclined forward and slightly to the left, the exact position of the Canadian Aphrodite. In fact, the position of the Kaufman head, for example. Furthermore, the area of the chin, which would further accentuate the angle, is gone. The nose is missing, the lips and chin are missing. And this would accentuate the angle and give a greater thrust to it. And I think this would be the answer, perhaps.
It was found, after all, in the Temple of
Yes.
Persephone, was it not?
Yes, in a shrine of Demeter and Persephone, and as it's a full-size statue, and as we've got the Demeter, the seated figure of Demeter, it would be natural to think this might be the corresponding figure of Persephone.
Persephone in Greek art was represented as a young girl, as a teenager. This is not the head of a young girl. It is the head of a mature woman at the height, at the zenith of her beauty, such as Aphrodite would have been represented. Therefore, the identification with Persephone has absolutely no substance.
The Temple of Aphrodite, which Miss Love has found, is up here, and the precinct of Demeter is there. It's quite a stiff climb, and it's well over half a mile's walk. If Miss Love can produce a reason why it was moved from A to B, good luck to her, but she must produce the reason.
My hypothesis at the moment is that the fragments that were collected in these roughly built chambers were brought there by the hand of man at some point, perhaps a zealous pagan, collecting fragments of deities and given, out of deference, a decent burial. This is not without parallel. For example, the great mass of archaic sculpture which was found on the Acropolis at Athens. There were two main east-west roads which connected the sanctuaries, one running to the north of the sanctuary of Aphrodite, leading to the Temenos of Demeter, and another main east-west road running to the south of the sanctuary of Aphrodite, and then therefore to the south of the Temenos of Demeter. This, in antiquity, made the Temenos of Demeter extremely accessible.
Where is Aphrodite, and what is she? Is she still somewhere protecting sailors? Or is she scattered in bits and pieces on the basement shelves of the British Museum? Or is she still in the earth, in bits and pieces there? That is the tantalizing, beautiful thing about the past. You can never truly know for certain how it really was. At least, through the science of archaeology, we may now know more about how a piece of marble and a goddess, the incomparable Aphrodite, have shared this lovely planet with us as it falls through the universe in an endless sea of time.
For further information about the Smithsonian, write to the Smithsonian Institution, Washington, D.C., 20560.